Okay, today on the Precon Chop Shop, we'll be talking about Cavalry Charge, a knight tribal deck with a splash of card looting and reanimation in white, blue, black that features the return of the absolutely broken Eminence ability from the tribal Precons from 2017. That commander is Sidar Jabari of Zalfir, a 4/3 legendary human knight with flying and first strike that costs 1 white, blue, black that has Eminence. It says whenever you attack with one or more knights, if Sidar is in the command zone or on the battlefield, draw a card, then discard a card. Then it says whenever Sidar deals combat damage to a player, return target knight creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Sidar as an Eminence commander may be reason enough to buy the Precon. While his Eminence ability is very toned down compared to Edgar or the Ur-Dragon, it is still highly synergistic with the rest of the deck and its tribe. A knight you control attacks, you draw a card and discard a mana-hungry knight. Cast your commander and attack with it to get that discarded knight onto the field for free. The commander has flying and first strike, so getting through for damage is much easier. And since you have access to white and blue, protecting your commander is very easy. Then the Precon itself will provide you with 32 knights, providing most of the heavy lifting, since the majority of us won't have a knight tribal deck. But we'll most likely have plenty of knights and tribal support cards in our bulk boxes or existing decks that will go a long way to upgrading this potentially devastating Precon. The bulk cards that fill the Precon list are actually very good inclusions that fill the needed slots with removal, protection, and ramp. To start with the good stuff in the deck, there's the secondary commander for the deck. Elenda and Azor is a 6/6 legendary vampire knight sphinx with flying and ward 2 that costs 3 white, blue, black. It says whenever it attacks, you may pay X white, blue, black. If you do, draw X cards. Then it says at the beginning of each end step, you may pay 4 life. If you do, create a number of 1/1 black vampire knight creature tokens with lifelink equal to the number of cards you've drawn this turn. This is a fantastic aristocrat commander. You set up your board to draw cards and ping your opponents when creatures die, sack your board during a turn to draw a bunch of cards, then pay 4 life to refill your board and do it again on the next turn. Keep blue mana open for counterspells and it's practically a done deal. Even though Elenda and Azor is a fantastic evasive knight for Sidar, it's definitely better as a commander of its own deck. If you hate tribal, picking up the single probably won't be cheap. The new cards in the deck are Exsanguinator Cavalry, a 3/2 vampire knight with menace and lifelink for 2 and a black. It says whenever a knight you control deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on that creature and create a blood token. This card belongs in this deck, since it puts counters on knights that do damage to players. But for a vampire deck, this isn't a bad single to purchase either. It will continually get bigger each time it deals combat damage, and in a vampire deck, it's probably getting counters from other vampire sources, and it's a pretty good deal for 3 mana total. The blood token is less important, but still provides artifacts on the field if you care about that, and a nominal amount of card draw. If you have a Sir Gwyn Hero of Ashvale commander deck, this is a definite pickup as a single, but since Sir Gwyn is more of an equipment commander, you might be more interested in picking up this Precon as a whole instead. Xerex Strobe Knight is a 2/2 human knight with flying and vigilance for 2 and a blue that says tap it to create a 2/2 white and blue knight creature token with vigilance. Activate only if you've cast 2 or more spells this turn. The flying might be the only reason this card stays in an upgraded version of this Precon. Casting 2 spells will be pretty rough since the curve on this deck leans into 2, 3, and 5 mana spells, and Sidar just plops knights onto the battlefield rather than letting you cast them for free, which would instantly make this card better. As a single, Xerex Strobe Knight might find a home in Spellslinger decks that like making tokens, but there are way better cards like Efficient Construction for artifacts or Talrand Sky Summoner for instances and sorceries. Considering that, it's probably better in the Precon rather than bought as a single for another deck. Before we go on, if you like what you've seen so far, why don't you hit that like button and sub to the channel? It helps these videos get out to more people who might be interested in them, and it helps the channel grow as a result. Thanks. Herald of Hoofbeats is a 3/3 human knight with horsemanship for 3 and a blue. It says other knights you control have horsemanship. Horsemanship says this creature can't be blocked except by creatures with horsemanship. Once again, this card belongs in this knight tribal deck, since it essentially makes your knights unblockable, and when it's inevitably removed, Sidar can get it right back onto the battlefield after combat damage is dealt. The only reason you would buy this as a single would be if you have a changeling tribal deck and you have a slot to make all of your creatures unblockable. Vidalian Wave Knight is a 3/3 merfolk knight that costs 2 white-blue that says whenever you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on each other merfolk and or knight you control. This, again, belongs in the knight tribal deck, of course, but as a single, it's a great card if you have a merfolk deck with white. Maybe Thrasios partnered with Ravos Soultender or another partner commander in white. The options are very slim, so once again, this as a single will probably be very cheap since the decks it could go into are very limited. Lochthwain Lancer is a 5/5 human knight with lifelink for 4 and a black. It says whenever a non-token knight you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you draw a card. This turns an opponent's board wipe into damage and card draw for yourself. Then, when you eventually attack with Sidar again, you can get any of the better knights back onto the battlefield. This only belongs in a knight tribal deck. Again, if you have a Sir Gwyn deck, you might want to pick up this Precon anyway because of the equipment theme that Sir Gwyn has. Conjurer's Mantle is an equipment that costs 1 and a white with an equip cost of 1. It says equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance. Whenever equipped creature attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a card that shares a creature type with that creature from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. In this Precon, since Sidar is so good about letting you draw and discard cards, as well as being in blue with access to better card draw, you might consider relocating Conjurer's Mantle to another tribal deck that could use better card selection. But this card will not be cheap as a single. It will absolutely belong in any tribal deck with white. Being able to dig 6 cards deep for a great creature you can cast that turn and might have a powerful ETB effect you need at the time is invaluable. Chivalric Alliance is an enchantment for 1 and a white that says whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, draw a card. You can pay 2 and discard a card to create a 2/2 white and blue knight creature token with vigilance. Even if this card didn't have the second ability, it would be worth the very high price tag it will eventually have. If you have a deck that likes to go wide and has white in the color identity, this should probably go in the deck. If you have a couple of spirit flyers that can swing without being taken out, this should probably go in the deck. If your deck is in white and you attack with at least 2 creatures, this should probably go in the deck. This, like the Conjurer's Mantle, has a home in a lot of decks, and its price tag as a single is going to reflect that. If you buy the Precon, this can be moved to another deck freely since Sidar will let you draw and discard a card each time you attack with a knight anyway. Then there's the Planechase cards. Path of the Enigma is a sorcery for 4 and a blue that says target player draws 4 cards. Then, starting with you, each player votes for Planeswalk or Chaos. If Planeswalk gets more votes, Planeswalk. If Chaos gets more votes or the vote is tied, Chaos ensues. Ichor Elixir is a 4-cost artifact that taps for 2 colorless mana and says if you would roll 1 or more planar dice, instead roll that many planar dice plus 1 and ignore 1. The planes included in this Precon are Innis Hain, Lityara, Mutual Epiphany, Orochi Colony, Poliano, Sokinzan, the Chaldaya, Truga Jungle, Turi Island, and Unyaro. Now, the notable reprints in this deck are kind of a big deal in regards to value. Adeline Resplendent Cathar is a great card utilized in white token decks and has only increased in price since its first printing. The cheapest and ugliest printing is $10 right now. Hero of Bladehold is a great card alongside Adeline or decks that include her as well. It's very effective in Ishin decks and aggro strategies thanks to Battlecry. This has only been printed once and it's sitting at about $12 right now. This tribal deck is also very generous to include 2 tribal artifact staples. Herald's Horn is a 3-cost artifact sitting at around 10, while Vanquisher's Banner costs 5 mana and is sitting at $15. Now, those are the reprints with a high price tag as I'm writing this, but there are 2 special mentions I want to bring up. Knight Exemplar gives other knights you control indestructible and is sitting at around $5. But back when the Knight Tribal Brawl deck came out with Throne of Eldraine, Knight Exemplar spiked to about $20. Wizards deciding to include it in a precon is an amazing decision, but an even better include is Hakan Stromgulled Scourge. This card synergizes with Sidar in a phenomenal way. It's a 3/3 for 1 and 2 black that says you can cast it from your graveyard but not from anywhere else. Then it says as long as it's on the battlefield, you can cast knights from your graveyard. When it dies, you lose 2 life. Sidar will let you discard this right into the graveyard after combat, and if Sidar isn't on the field, you can cast any knights from the graveyard until Sidar lets you get them out for free. Right now it's about $2, but back in Eldraine, it went up to $20 also, but it didn't exactly fit well with the equipment theme of a Sir Gwyn deck. Imagine how much it would have become if it wasn't included in this precon. Even so, this card may spike because players may for some reason choose to buy Sidar as a single and build a Knight Tribal deck from scratch. The Cavalry Charge Precon, in my opinion, is a phenomenally built Knight Tribal deck that includes some very good cards that wouldn't see play in other decks and have been included in the Precon, which will let a buyer avoid the pricey spikes that those cards would have seen if they weren't included. If you buy the Precon to strip for parts, you'll still end up with a great Knight Tribal deck that could still make great use of cheap replacements while sending the best cards into your existing Tribal decks. If you're not interested in buying yet another Tribal deck, the Tribal singles you want to pick up may actually wind up being nearly the same amount as the Precon will be. Chivalric Alliance, Conjurer's Mantle, Herald's Horn, and Vanquisher's Banner all together could easily total the price of the Precon. If you care about your budget like I do, make sure you check the card prices and compare your total to the price of the Precon to make sure you get the most out of your money. And then for singles, there's Elenda and Azor, a strong commander that I can see going for a hefty price tag if you just want to build around that. But for me, I don't have any of the tribal pieces in this deck, and the Knight Tribal deck itself looks like a lot of fun to play, so this may be the Precon I purchase out of all of them. I just really like this one. But why don't you let me know what you think of the Cavalry Charge Precon and what you'll do with it if you decide to buy it, or what singles you'll pick up in the comments below. If you like this Chop Shop series, be sure to sub to the channel so you don't miss more in the future. Next is the Phyrexian Tribal deck Growing Threat, so look forward to that. But in the meantime, like the video if you liked the video, dislike it if you disliked it, and until next time, I'm Space Coconut, and you're welcome.